Dear friends, welcome to the channel The Eastern Front. Today I will tell you about the history of the appearance of the cocktail, about what properties a real Molotov cocktail should have. And also, at the end of the video, you will find out what kind of cocktail the Germans made on the Eastern Front. Which cocktail do you prefer? Bloody Mary, Daiquiri, Cuba Libre or Mojito? Gentlemen prefer hotter. What is hotter has been called Molotov cocktail for almost 80 years. Bottles with a combustible mixture or liquid grenades with all the cheapness and simplicity of manufacture proved their effectiveness in many wars. The Spanish Republicans were the first to use them in defensive battles against Francoist tanks in 1936. They filled bottles with gasoline and plugged it with a cork wrapped in tow. At the right moment, the tow was set on fire and the bottles were thrown at the target. Burning gasoline penetrated into the fighting compartment, which led to a fire inside the tank and detonation of ammunition, and getting into the engine and transmission compartment. Gasoline easily ignited the engine. It turned out to be a very effective anti-tank weapon. Later, bottle weapons were adopted by many armies. The Molotov cocktail was also successfully used during the Soviet-Finnish War. The Finns have a problem with ammunition. They came up with the idea of pouring incendiary mixture in bottles and name it after the famous politician. At first, it turned out like this: cocktail for Molotov. However, foreign journalists have changed the name to Molotov cocktail. In the Red Army, the invention also caught on and was in the demand already in the early days of the Great Patriotic War. At the beginning of the war, the State Defense Committee decided to use bottles with a combustible mixture in the fight against tanks. Marshal Bagramyan recalled the first weeks of the war on the Southwestern Front. There was not enough artillery. Germans' tanks were met with the bundles of grenades. Unfortunately, the grenades were not always enough. Then we remembered the experience of the Republicans of Spain, began to collect bottles, fill them with gasoline. The weapon is simple, but in bold and skillful hands it's quite effective. And then he bitterly noted that there is not so much artillery in the units. More and more often it's necessary to use bottles with flammable liquid against tanks. The appeal to bottles has become a purely forced measure, more a means of moral support for their infantry than an anti-tank weapon. The German tanks were rushing forward, and all the means available at that moment were used to stop them. Already on 7 July 1941, the State Defense Committee adopted a special resolution on anti-tank incendiary grenades, as Molotov cocktails were called. Incendiary bottles, beer or vodka bottles with a capacity of half or 1 liter, were adopted by the Red Army of two types: with self-igniting liquid KS, BGS, or with combustible mixture number 1 and number 3. The frontline soldiers call them fire grenades or fire bombs, and self-igniting combustible mixture of KS as an insidious mixture or cocktail of death. Incendiary bottles were filled with KS liquids of two types, in pure form as well as with impurities that give the liquid viscosity, stickiness. In appearance, liquids differ in color. Pure has a yellow-green color, and a liquid with an admixture for viscosity is a dark brown. The smell of both liquids resembles the smell of rotten eggs. Liquids in the air self-ignite and burn with a bright flame, with the formation of a large amount of white smoke. The temperature reaches 800 to 1000 Celsius. The liquid KS with an admixture for viscosity gets into tank, sticks, seals the viewing slots and glasses, and when burning heats up parts of the tank in places of contact. The smoke emitted blinds the crew. The burning liquid seeping through the cracks burns everything inside the tank, incapacitates the engine, and can ignite the gasoline tanks. Fleeing from the fire, the crew is forced to leave the tank. Getting on the uniform, the igniting liquid sticks and quickly leaks out, causing severe burns. Duration of burning 1 bottle with the KS 2-3 minutes. The liquid KS in its pure form has the same properties as the viscous mixture, but it adheres less to object and it's slightly inferior in duration of burning, 1–2 minutes. Extinguishing liquids KS is very difficult. Burning occurs on a large surface. Liquids are extinguished with sand, earth and water. At the same time, it must be remembered that in case of insufficient filling with earth, as well as after evaporation of water, the liquid can ignite again. The difference between KS liquid and mixture number 1 and number 3 is a lower burning temperature till 800 degrees Celsius. And also after the liquid is extinguished, the combustion doesn't resume on its own. The liquid ignites from a special lighter's igniters. A layer of water and kerosene was added to the filled bottle, protecting the KS liquid from the contact with air. For transportation, the bottles are placed in a wooden box and covered with earth. On 12 August 1941, the People's Commissar of Defense approved the instructions for the use of incendiary bottles. According to it, the regiments and divisions began the formation and training of groups of tank destroyers with incendiary bottles. And soon the use of bottles began to be taught to all personnel. In the memos on the fight against tanks, next to the arrows indicating the vulnerabilities of enemy tank, in addition to the inscription "hit with the shell" or "hit with a grenade," an unusual "hit with a bottle" appeared. A Molotov cocktail should have been thrown on the roof of the engine and transmission compartment, and this was possible only when the tank was approaching almost closely or after its passage over the trench. The throw range was set to 30 meters, but really was 18–20 meters. Throwing bottles proved successful from trenches. Experienced fighters spent an average of 2–3 bottles to defeat the tank. Their actions outside the shelters led to heavy losses among the fighters. By the way, there is an interesting video on my channel about why the soldiers of the Red Army didn't like the RPG anti-tank grenades. The link will appear as always in the right corner of the screen. The tactics of a soldier armed with the Molotov cocktails are at first glance simple. Having settled down in a shelter, it was necessary to let the tank at a distance of 15–20 meters and throw a bottle into it, trying to get either into the engine part or under the turret. All this is simple on paper, but not in a real battle. When a tank attack is accompanied by a powerful artillery support, and enemy infantry comes after the tanks, conducting dense suppression fire. Often, when a fighter swung for a throw, a bullet or a fragment pierced the bottle with a mixture, and the person turned into a living torch. The bottles went well with the grenades. Tank destroyers practice such a technique, throwing an anti-tank grenade or a bunch of grenades into the chassis of the tank, and after stopping it, throwing a bottle on the tank. Molotov cocktails were also intended to destroy pillboxes and bunkers, manpower in shelters and aircraft in parking lots. Bottles in the Red Army were weapons not only during the Blitzkrieg because of the lack of other. They were also used at the end of the war by irregular groups of fighters, usually 1–2 per fighter, plus a reserve for a platoon of up to 30 bottles. The combat score of bottles is impressive. According to official data, over the years of the war, a total of 2,500 tanks, self-propelled guns and armored vehicles, 1,200 pillboxes and bunkers, 2,500 other fortifications, 800 vehicles and 65 military warehouses were destroyed with their help. They were also widely used in the system of anti-tank and anti-personnel barriers. In defensive battles near Moscow, firing shafts and fields were already used. The firing shafts were made of various combustible materials and set on fire with bottles of KS. The bottle field consisted of bottles buried in the ground, 15,000 bottles per 1 hectare. In minefields, Molotov cocktails were installed in combinations with anti-tank mines. In the middle of the war, the practice of creating fire mine landmines Spread about 20 bottles were placed around an anti-tank mine along the radius, which gave a column of fire up to 8 meters high during the explosion, hitting an area of about 300 square meters with a burning liquid. So, in one of the reports dated 8 December 1941, the command says, "In the battles with the German invaders, fire shafts, fields of bottles with a combustible mixture and high explosive flamethrowers brought significant combat benefits. The firing field burned for 4 hours. The height of the flame reached 2–3 meters and in places 4–5 meters. The enemy tanks were forced to change their combat course and move along the defense front, exposing the most vulnerable side part to the fire of the anti-tank defense, as a result of which up to 20 enemy tanks were destroyed by artillery and anti-tank guns. Barriers made of bottles of flammable liquid delayed the movement of enemy tanks, and some of them caught fire in these fields. A total of 15 bottle fields were arranged at the front of the 5th Army, with a total consumption of up to 70,000 bottles. The German army also had a kind of Molotov cocktail. In response to the appearance of the Soviet heavy tanks on the battlefields of the Second World War, which the Wehrmacht anti-tank artillery couldn't hit, the Germans developed instructions for their troops how to destroy Soviet heavy KV and East tanks, in which it was recommended to pour a bucket of gasoline over the tank and set it on fire. The Iron Cross was awarded to the brave man for the destroyed Soviet tank. Also, another option for close-range anti-tank warfare was recommended to use a canister with gasoline and a hand grenade tied to it as short-range anti-tank weapon. Dear friends, that's all for today. It was Tim and the Eastern Front channel. So, how do you think nowadays in real combat it's still useful or not? Write your comments, and as usual, I wish you peace and health. See you!